In our next conversation, we want to look at how to reposition Nigeria's power sector that has been bedeviled with incessant collapse last year, and I'm looking at what can be done for the new year. Nigeria's power sector in 2023 was characterized by a series of grid collapses, gas shortages, and inadequate investments, to name a few. And despite having a generation capacity of about 7,000 megawatts, the sector struggled to sustain output above 5,000 megawatts. But it wasn't all doom and gloom, as the Electricity Act 2023 was introduced to liberalize the industry. This morning, Chairman, West Power and Gas, George Etomi, joins us now for this conversation. Thank you so much, George Etomi, for talking to us.
My pleasure. Good morning.
To start with, how would you describe the power sector in 2023 in one word? I'd like you to elaborate on it and tell us what were the wins and the near misses.
In one word, the power sector was a struggle, and that's because, like you said in your introduction, we're still struggling with gas shortages, which were impacting on the ability to transmit electricity. So which meant that the average production of 4,000 megawatts was grossly insufficient to meet the demand for electricity. There was also the issue of capitalization. And I don't know if you were aware that about 5 discos were essentially repossessed by their funders. And that sent very negative signals to investors. And in fact, only yesterday, we saw that the Kaduna Disco board that was repossessed by funders has now been dissolved, and NEC is sending in an interim board to manage them. Those are usually danger signals for the industry. We have always said that not just capital that's required in the industry, we need to actually align policy leadership to align with the investment drive. We still have a situation in which the policy signals are mixed. Towards the end of 2022, there was an attempt to reset the industry, and quite a lot was achieved at that time. And the market has essentially become a contract-based market, which essentially means that all members of the value chain can hold each other responsible for their contractual obligations. But where this is not happening is at the gas supply end. Gas, as you may know, constitutes over 60% of the component of electricity for the thermal plants, which provide about 80% of our needs. Gas is supplied to the industry on a best endeavor basis. In other words, you cannot contractually hold gas suppliers to any obligation to supply gas. And the reasons are many. They will tell you the gas pricing is poor. They will tell you the infrastructure doesn't exist. And they will tell you that they're owed a lot by the government from past obligations. So until we achieve that realignment, you will always have this epileptic supply from time to time. Now, grid collapse can occur, one, from lack of gas. Two, it could be from the share stream. Okay. The grid has not, let me say, been expanded for as long as any one of us can remember.
Okay.
And so today, with the best effort, it can only wheel between 4,000 and 5,000 comfortably. I just use the word comfortably very advisedly, because if you tend to push beyond that, it shows signs of strain, and then you begin to experience collapses here and there. So that needs to be strengthened, and it's important this fact is made, because it's only the transmission that's still with the government. The distribution has been privatized, just like generation. So market forces are determining investments in them. You talked about the Electricity Act, which is expected to be a game changer in the sense that it is then expected that it will disaggregate electricity supply. And discos are expected from this point on to source for their own power, make investments to receive this power. And all those are going on now. Now, the state government's participation will mean that they can also become sector regulators, and the distribution companies regulators. These are all new areas, uncharted territory. So what those of us who have been in the industry have always advocated is that there should be a large measure of collaboration in the beginning.
Okay, Etomi,
those who've invested.
Yeah, sorry to cut in. Before you go ahead, I'd like to still dwell on the issue of efficiency, but at this time on the part of the transmission company of Nigeria. We understand that last year the federal government finally agreed to unbundle it into two entities. So before we begin to look at other areas, let's quickly look at this. What are your expectations regarding this decision? What significant changes should we expect with the unbundling?
Yes, the government is going to split them into the two component parts because transmission has a systems operator. It also has the guy who does the dispatches. One is essentially expected to look at the commercial end of the value chain, and then the other one is to look at the technical. And today they are all married under transmission. So once that is achieved, then it is expected that in terms of being professionally run, you can then begin to look for personnel that can run them. There still needs to be investment to be made in them, and I'm sure you've known that part of what the Siemens whole transaction is all about is to strengthen the systems operator so that they can begin to put in equipment that will enable them take load when the time comes. So for it to be professionally run, yes, you need that separation. And it will be a good step in the right direction, but it will still require a bit more. Some advocate that why don't you just go ahead and privatize it? Because it was, in the beginning, felt that if you commercialized it, get a good concession to a very good company. They tried it with Manitoba of Canada, Hydro of Canada. That didn't work out. So perhaps this system will enable them at least deal with the immediate problems.
Okay.
Now, that is because we're dealing with a centralized grid. But part of what we do with the reforms will be then to see how you can also generate and distribute power outside a centralized grid.
And
so
I want
to looking at mini grids.
Of course, yes. Looking at what is to be done, I want to believe that is all encompassing in the Electricity Act 2023 that was introduced last year. So even as we move forward, I'd like to know how important that particular act is and how can it be strategically implemented if we hope to improve power supply in the country.
Like I mentioned to you, the what should be collaboration because it's uncharted territory. So there are bound to be hiccups. But the most important thing is that the spirit is to ensure that states participate more in the entire value chain. And in the case of distribution, they should be able to regulate, get their own regulator to regulate discos within their territory. That is fine. And the moment a state passes its own law, it is then expected to take over the responsibility of NERC within that state. But one hiccup would be there are some discos that traverse more than one state. So you may find a situation in which a disco that, for example, traverses 4 states, and each of those 4 states has now passed their own law. It means technically they must have 4 regulators regulating their current business. It could be a regulatory nightmare, and it could be a put-off for investors if that process is not managed well. Some experts have said, okay, why don't they set up subsidiary companies in each of those states, and then each one of them is then regulated by that state. But in my opinion, I don't see anything stopping 2-3 states from coming together to pursue a common interest, agree on a common regulator, agree on the methodology of execution,
Now,
so that you don't. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry to cut in, of course. Talking about regulatory reforms and the viability of discos, as we've been talking about. Now, we got newswind that the Kaduna Disco made headlines this morning with the industry regulator announcing the sack of the board of directors and the dissolution of the board too. So what are your thoughts on this development? Would it have any impact whatsoever?
Yes, it just falls in line with what I mentioned to you, that towards the end of 2022, there had been talks about resetting the industry so that it becomes a contract-based market. And in the course of enforcing some of these contracts, some discos fell by the wayside. About 5 of them were essentially repossessed by their funders, who appointed receivers. And those receivers were supposed to steady the business until they get new investors into the sector. But the overriding control still rests with NERC, because under Section 75 of the Electricity Act, NERC can and has the powers to intervene in a situation where it finds out that the state of affairs of a particular distribution company portends danger to the overall well-being, and then they can step in. In the case of Kaduna Disco, the funders were Afriexim. When they stepped in, they took over the board, and they were supposed to have come up with a plan to NERC about how the disco would be recapitalized, either through getting new investors or they injecting capital into it. The timeline they give to the regulator didn't happen, even after a further extension. And so what the regulator has done in exercise of that power, because the inability to get fund meant that they couldn't meet with their market obligations. And Afriexim were reluctant to provide any guarantees in the event that they have to pay for those market obligations. That's the reason NERC stepped in. And they've now appointed an interim board who will manage the affairs until such a time as it can be resolved.
Okay, well, we know that about 2.5 billion naira is what, in capital injection is what the federal government is aiming for. We hope that with partnership, both internally and of course with external partners, hopefully they will be able to arrive at that figure to help fuel the sector. Chairman, West Power and Gas, George Etomi, thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure.
Now we go on a short break. When we return, we'll bring you international business stories and we'll wrap up with our last conversation. To stay with us.